What if the headlines about modern wars and sanctions barely scratch the surface of the truth? Every day, we are bombarded with news flashes and breaking stories. Russian forces pushing deeper into Ukrainian territory, Western leaders vowing unwavering support and resistance, Eastern officials touting what they call historic victories. Each side crafts its own story: heroic defenders versus ruthless invaders, inevitable progress versus desperate resistance. But beneath these polished narratives, the reality is tangled, unpredictable, and carries consequences that ripple far beyond the battlefield, often morphing into new forms that few anticipate. Think back to the stories about the Cold War. In the 1950s and 60s, headlines screamed about nuclear arsenals and ideological showdowns. Yet, the true game played out in secret negotiations, arms races, and proxy conflicts in places like Vietnam and Afghanistan. Today's headlines may differ in setting, but the same principle holds. What you see is only a fraction of the real story. Take sanctions, for instance. These are supposed to be the West's ultimate weapon, a bloodless way to force change. Washington and Brussels declare that Moscow will crumble under this economic siege. Yet, despite round after round of restrictions, Russian oil keeps moving, rerouted through new partners, emerging with altered price tags, reshaping the entire global market in subtle but profound ways. The real effects? They are hidden away in technical loopholes, murky deals, and the relentless churn of global finance. If you only trust the official line, you risk missing the deeper impact. Let's look at a historical parallel. In the 1990s, similar sanctions were imposed on Iraq. On paper, they were meant to halt Saddam Hussein's regime. In reality, creative smuggling networks flourished, and ordinary Iraqis suffered shortages while the regime endured. The lesson: sanctions rarely work as neatly as politicians promise. While the world's gaze lingers on Ukraine's battered steppes, a new front is emerging far to the south. The United States now threatens intervention in Venezuela, waving the banner of justice and democracy. But is this truly about defending human rights, or is something else at play? Control over oil, influence, and the precarious balance of power in the Americas. Let's not forget the Iran-Contra affair of the 1980s, where public rhetoric masked covert operations to influence the balance of power in Central America. The playbook is familiar, and the stakes, as always, are high. Accepting surface-level stories means ignoring the seismic shifts happening beneath our feet. Ordinary people, from Kherson's neighborhoods to the oil towns of Latin America, bear the costs of these contests between giants. The true price is not measured only in land or sanctions, but in the silent ways these clashes reshape economies, societies, and the rules of the global order. It is time to look past the curtain. Let's trace these conflicts as they really unfold, from the trenches of Ukraine to the oil negotiations in India and the rising tensions in the Caribbean. Unraveling the truth means following the money, the alliances, and the hidden deals that rarely make the news. The deeper we dig, the clearer the world's shifting foundations become. Think of the Suez Crisis in 1956. A dispute over a canal revealed layers of economic interests, global alliances, and long-term consequences that few understood at first glance. On the ground, war is stripped of spectacle. It plays out with relentless, icy logic, methodical, brutal, and indifferent to cameras or headlines. Russian troops advance not for propaganda, but with cold calculation. They move deliberately, seizing one position after another, locking down supply lines and entrenching themselves. Their progress is measured not in dramatic moments, but in steady, deliberate gains, kilometer by kilometer, strong point by strong point. This mirrors the World War I trench advances, where territory was measured in meters, but the consequences echoed across continents. Ukrainian defenders are stretched to the breaking point. Where entire companies once manned the front, now only a handful, sometimes as few as 4 or 5, exhausted soldiers stand guard. One person may be left to defend 200 meters of exposed terrain, facing unyielding pressure. The assault is relentless, not just infantry, but coordinated waves of drones, artillery, and electronic warfare, all synchronized to overwhelm. Consider a practical scenario. Imagine a small team of defenders in a battered industrial zone. They have limited ammunition, little rest, and dwindling supplies. Overhead, drones buzz, searching for any sign of movement. Artillery shells crash nearby, shattering buildings and nerves alike. In the chaos, a single decision, whether to hold or retreat, can mean the survival or destruction of the entire unit. Yet Kiev's political leadership remains fixated on the image of control. Orders come down. Hold every inch, never withdraw, even from indefensible ground. The survival of soldiers and preservation of material take a back seat to the optics of resistance. This paradox is cruel. Leaders cling to appearances, while the front fractures and men are lost. Volunteers, activists, and frontline troops speak bluntly about the Russian strategy. The front is not merely cracking. In places, it is collapsing outright. Russian forces now strike deep, cutting supply routes, isolating garrisons, and exploiting every exposed flank. It is a campaign of exhaustion, methodical and unsparing, and for now, it is succeeding. Key Ukrainian cities hang in the balance. The cost is tallied not only in territory, but in soldiers' lives and the fading credibility of national leadership. With every week, the stakes rise. Should these lines give way, so too does the hope of holding Ukraine's heartland. Yet war is not waged on battlefields alone. As positions erode, another front emerges, an economic struggle, where the risks and unknowns are equally dire. Beyond the trenches, financial and political pressures mount, threatening to undermine Ukraine's ability to sustain the war. Here, the fate of the nation is shaped by factors far from the front lines. Sanctions are crafted to strangle economies, but when oil, money, and politics collide, the impact ripples in unexpected directions. Who truly bears the cost when economic warfare erupts? Western nations unleash wave after wave of new sanctions, aiming straight for Russian oil giants, hoping to drain the financial lifeblood from Moscow's war engine. On paper, these measures seem crushing. Yet the Russian state adapts with startling speed, deploying shadow fleets, rerouting tankers through obscure ports, and layering ownership behind endless shell companies. The logistics become a labyrinth that thwarts even the most dogged investigators. The oil does not stop. It simply shifts course. Countries like India and China dramatically increase their imports of discounted Russian oil. Publicly, governments pledge to enforce global sanctions. Privately, energy-hungry economies find reasons to keep the barrels moving. Official figures appear clean, but behind closed doors, deals are struck and ships are diverted, all out of sight. Let's use a concrete example. In 2023, India's oil imports from Russia soared to record highs, despite official Western pressure. Indian refiners purchased crude at discounted rates, refined it, and then exported finished products to Europe and beyond. In effect, Russian oil reached Western markets through a roundabout route, blunting the intended impact of sanctions. Each new round of restrictions triggers a market response. Russian oil trades at a deep discount, but worldwide supply stays sufficient to prevent true shortages. Instead, energy prices edge higher everywhere. The oil market is a tightly woven web. Squeeze one strand, and the entire system trembles. The result is rising fuel and food costs not just in Moscow, but also in Milwaukee, Manchester, and Mumbai. American and European leaders tout the success of sanctions, pointing to battered Russian revenues and a stumbling ruble. But the deepest pain lands elsewhere, on ordinary families facing soaring bills as inflation races to new peaks. Politicians highlight Russia's economic wounds, but rarely mention the Western middle class's struggles, shrinking savings, slowing growth, and a gnawing sense of uncertainty. Ironically, Russia's elite often sidestep the worst effects. Oligarchs move assets offshore, the well-connected slip through new loopholes, and those at the top feel little direct shock. The real burden falls on the global middle class, workers and consumers from Berlin to Buenos Aires, who absorb the ripple effects while those in power maneuver for their next advantage. Sanctions were meant to alter the logic of conflict. Instead, they redraw the boundaries of hardship. The global economy keeps moving, but the costs are scattered far beyond the original targets. As oil and money slide into the shadows, politicians on every side scramble for new narratives and fresh adversaries to blame. But while the economic chess game plays out in global markets, a quieter struggle unfolds on the ground. The conflict's human cost grows, even as leaders wage battles of influence and perception. When the old strategies falter, the search for a fresh battleground leads far beyond Europe. As the familiar promises of justice and security lose their grip on Ukraine and Russia, Washington quietly pivots southward. Suddenly, Venezuela is thrust into the spotlight, as American officials escalate threats and revive the war on drugs as a new pretext for intervention. The Trump administration moved quickly, positioning warships and military assets just off Venezuela's shores. The signal was unmistakable. Direct military action was now a real possibility, and the Caribbean became a theater for power projection, not diplomatic compromise. Tension spreads across Latin America. In Caracas, leaders scramble to reinforce defenses, while Colombia, torn between old alliances and bitter memories, fears being pulled into conflict. The pattern is painfully familiar: isolate the target, justify intervention through lofty ideals, and bypass congressional scrutiny at home. Let's draw another historical parallel. In 1989, the United States invaded Panama under the banner of restoring democracy. The official rhetoric hid economic and strategic motivations, as well as the desire to control the Panama Canal. The aftermath saw devastation for Panamanians and a reshuffling of regional alliances, echoes that persist today. Yet beneath the surface, the true motivations emerge. These maneuvers have less to do with justice or any genuine threat from narcotics, and far more with domestic politics, oil reserves, and the interests of powerful economic lobbies. The rhetoric changes, but the goal remains: control, influence, and access to resources. The risks are staggering. A single misstep could spark a wider conflict, destabilizing not just Venezuela, but economies and societies throughout the Americas. For Washington, it is a rehearsal for future confrontations. For millions in Latin America, it threatens daily life and national stability. To bring this into practical focus, imagine you are a small business owner in Bogotá. Suddenly, regional instability spikes, the currency wobbles, imports become more expensive, and customers grow anxious. The specter of war, even if it never arrives, reverberates through daily life. But what do these rising tensions mean for those forced to endure them, on every side of the divide? As the world's attention shifts, the real consequences begin to unfold, not in strategy rooms, but in the lives of ordinary people already caught in the crossfire. Their struggles illuminate the true price of these shadow games. If leaders keep running the same old plays, how do you defend your savings and your sense of reality? The answer lies in spotting the fractures in official stories and daring to ask the questions others avoid. Stay alert when government narratives shift overnight, or when leaders downplay genuine hardship to protect their reputations. These sudden pivots are not accidents. They are warning signs, waving in plain sight. When the story changes faster than the facts on the ground, someone is not telling you the whole truth. Consider sanctions. Every cycle, you hear sweeping claims that they will cripple the target. Yet history is clear. Sanctions are almost always sidestepped. Money finds new routes, shadow networks thrive, loopholes widen. Meanwhile, politicians declare victory for the cameras, while the core problems persist. The real goal becomes image, not impact. We see the same pattern in war aims. Leaders set bold targets, but soon the objectives blur. Maps are redrawn, and the front lines shift to social media. The real price, lost cities, shattered economies, families uprooted, is paid by ordinary people far from the halls of power. What can you do? Look past the headlines. Ask who really profits when policies change. Track the actual economic effects, not just the promises. Does a new sanction punish a corrupt billionaire, or just drive up your bills? Does military escalation alter the balance, or merely spark a new refugee crisis? Learning these cycles gives you an edge. When you understand the playbook, you can spot which sectors will rise or fall, where markets might move before the headlines, and how world events could threaten your savings. You sidestep surprises and resist the next polished narrative. Let's break this down into practical steps, because knowledge is only as powerful as the action it inspires. First, diversify your sources of information. Do not rely solely on government statements or major media outlets. Seek out independent analysts, local correspondents, and experts with a track record of accuracy. For example, during the Greek financial crisis of 2010, those who followed independent economic bloggers often anticipated market moves before official announcements. Second, monitor supply chains and commodity prices. If you notice disruptions in shipping lanes, like those in the Red Sea or the Black Sea, it is a sign that global trade is under stress. Rising costs for oil, wheat, or metals can foreshadow inflation and shortages months before they hit your local supermarket. Third, protect your savings by considering safe haven assets. During times of uncertainty, gold, certain currencies like the Swiss franc, or even diversified international funds can provide stability. In 2008, investors who diversified beyond domestic stocks weathered the financial storm more smoothly than those who stayed all in on a single market. Fourth, think globally, but act locally. Support community initiatives that build resilience, whether that means learning new skills, growing some of your own food, or joining neighborhood networks. In post-war Japan, local cooperatives helped families survive until the wider economy recovered. The principle is timeless. Strong communities weather global storms better than isolated individuals. Fifth, keep your critical thinking sharp. When a new crisis emerges, ask, who benefits? What long-standing interests are being served? Is the stated reason for action the real one, or is there a hidden agenda? In the run-up to the Iraq War in 2003, some citizens asked these questions and saw through the fog of official justification, preparing accordingly. The danger? Ignore these patterns, and you risk your money, your trust, and your grasp on reality. The true cost of being fooled is not just financial loss. It is losing your ability to act as an informed global citizen. So as new engines thunder across distant borders and fresh crises brew, let us shift to practical steps, how you can move now before the next story breaks. Now, let us break down the concrete moves you can make to safeguard your position. The real work starts before the world's attention pivots again. You have glimpsed what lies beneath the surface. So what will you do now? From the outset, you joined a journey that stripped away the glossy armor of headlines and official statements. What you have uncovered is a world where public stories are carefully engineered to distract or disguise, while the true strategies and sacrifices play out in the shadows. You are not merely an observer here. The greatest danger is surrendering your agency to the endless churn of slogans and spin. If you allow others to dictate the story, you risk losing your grasp on what truly shapes your life, your safety, and your future. Never forget, the real costs of these conflicts and sanctions are not paid by leaders or pundits, but by ordinary citizens and entire regions left destabilized for generations. The same cycle repeats. Powerful actors find new justifications, and the burden always falls on the public. So, consider, do you accept the official narrative, or do you probe deeper? Will you share these doubts, challenge assumptions, and demand better than easy answers? In a world built on contradiction and hidden interests, staying curious and skeptical is not just smart, it is essential. Now you hold the tools to pierce the noise. Use them, question the stories, examine the motives, and share what you have learned. Only an informed public can break the pattern of manipulation and reclaim genuine influence. Remember the lessons of history, from the Suez Crisis to the Panama invasion, from the Greek debt collapse to the endless cycles of sanctions and shadow markets. These stories are not just about the past. They are warnings for the future and blueprints for those who wish to see clearly. Stay alert, stay informed, and stay engaged. The world's headlines may not reveal every truth, but your curiosity, your skepticism, and your willingness to act can keep you ahead of the next wave. Because in the end, the only thing more dangerous than believing the surface story is never questioning it at all.